Good morning. This is Jane Hampshire from FireDogLake.com. I'm here on Blogging Heads TV today with Jerome Corsi. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jane. How are you?
I'm doing good. You're on a book tour, I take it.
Yes, I've been promoting my new book, The Obama Nation, and the subtitle is Leftist Politics and the Cult of Personality.
Well, congratulations. You made it to the New York Times bestseller list. I think that is amazing. That's an amazing achievement for any writer.
It was number one New York Times bestseller for a month. It's going to be on the list, we know for sure, for 7 weeks. And then I'll be trying to promote it in the last month here of the campaign, so I'm going to do my best to keep it longer on the bestseller list.
That's so great. Well, I'm sure there are many aspiring writers out there who look at that achievement and kind of want to know how you did it. Who was your publisher on that?
A publisher was Simon & Schuster. They're a great publisher. It's my second number one New York Times bestseller. I also co-authored with John O'Neill The Unfit for Command in 2004 against John Kerry. And I've actually written, in the last 4 years, I've written 8 books. And 4 of them have been New York Times bestsellers. 4 of the 8 have all been New York Times bestsellers. This is my 4th New York Times bestseller, the second one that was number one on the list.
Well, tell me a little bit about the little dagger that is next to your book's name on the New York Times seller list. What does that mean?
Well, they put that in for bulk sales, and what they try to imply is that there's some wealthy billionaire conservative out there who's buying cartloads of my books and putting them in warehouses. That it's really not the public buying the book. Well, it's just not the case. I mean, we have a couple of book clubs, or at least one pack that I know of that's using the book as a premium item. But the sales, by and large, are retail sales to the individual buyers. The New York Times just tries to do that so they can say, this book is number one, but it's not really selling to the public. It's just rich conservatives buying them up and trying to get the book to be boosted on the list. It's just not true.
So who is this pack that both bought your book?
I work with a Freedom's Defense Fund, which is a pack in Washington, D.C. I've worked with them for years.
They're doing the ads right now about Barack Obama and all of the African-American imagery, right?
That's the New York Times accused me of being racist, and of course the New York Times, I think, is an official organ of the, the official organ of the Democratic National Committee, I think. We would have run the ads in Freedom's Defense Fund, and I wrote this in WorldNet Daily, where I'm a staff reporter. I answered, and so did Michael Santani, who's the head of the Freedom's Defense Fund. I'm a paid consultant to the fund. We would have run those ads if Mayor Kilpatrick were white or green. The point of the ad was, for instance, this corrupt mayor of Detroit. The point of the ad wasn't that he was African-American, it was that he was corrupt. And
I'm sure that choice of those 4 people had nothing to do with the fact that they're African-American.
That's the point. I'm not going to accept that, Jane. You can't just slip those little, it's daggers of your own in the conversation. I don't buy that. I'm telling you that we're going to run them also. The New York Times said, so now because we're running on Bill Ayers and he's white, that makes us racist too because we're showing Obama with a white person? I mean, Ayers is an underground bomber, and now we've had the ability to look at these Annenberg Challenge documents. For years he was on this board with Bill Ayers, and they were together implementing, very seriously, working hand-in-hand, participating this radical agenda to radicalize our schools. So if these associations are criticizing it because they're socialists.
Honestly, I didn't mean to give you a cheap shot.
I've had so many cheap shots. I've had so many cheap shots, I'm sensitive to them. So,
I understand. I understand, and I'm sure it has been difficult for you out there.
I actually don't mind it. No, Jane, wait, I want to comment on that. I don't mind it. I mean, I expect people to take cheap shots. I just don't let them slide by. Personally, it's more of a... To me, it reflects more negatively on the person taking the cheap shot than on me, because I know I'm not a racist. I've written books with African Americans, Ken Blackwell. I've done a lot in my life to promote racial relations in the United States, and I know it's just the other person taking an unfair cheap shot, so it doesn't really affect me much, but yet I don't let it slip by.
Well, I know you were upset when people accused you of going on the pro-white radio show Political Cesspool.
That's a joke.
Talk about that?
I must have been on the last year, almost 2,000 radio shows, certainly in the last 18 months. My publicist sets up the radio shows when we get requests. I don't screen the shows that I'm on, just like with your blog today. This is the first time I've ever been on this blog, first time I ever knew about your blog. I don't do a profile search of you before I go on it. I'm happy to be available to a whole wide range of media and interviewers. I'm not endorsing the interviewer because I go on their show. This, again, is just another cheap shot. I mean, I guess I was on this once.
With all due fairness, you went on a show and have been on it, and the guy calls himself objectively pro-white. And if you're a representative, you cancel your plans on the show, and I think that's great.
Jane,
the question is, now knowing that he's pro-white, do you condemn the show?
Now, Jane, look, I'm telling you, I've also been on shows that have covered a whole way. I go on far-left shows, who I think are also politically objectionable. But I'm not going to, take these far-left shows and have to run a political critique of them to be on the show. I don't endorse the show or the guest or the host or anybody else. I'm there to say what I want to say.
But you must admit that if people are having questions now about running these ads against Obama that some say are racist, that if you go on a show that calls itself pro-white, that people are going to have concerns. That's just natural, Jerome. I mean, you're a smart guy, you know that.
Jane, I don't buy this because you're trying to get here some kind of a little political correctness routine you got running in your head. And I'm sorry you have that. There's free speech out there, and what I'm telling you is it's very robust. And I'm going to go on shows where I don't agree with the host, I don't agree with the other guests, I don't agree with the callers. It doesn't compromise who I am or what I believe in. I'm not endorsing them to be on their show. Now, you may not want to hear me say that, but that's the point I'm going to argue and I'm going to take.
Well, I just want to know, he says that it represents a philosophy that is pro-white, and Edward states that, the host states that interracial sex is white genocide. Do you condemn that?
Of course, it's an idiotic idea. But I don't have to, I'm sure you've got some ideas I might think are idiotic too. You're leading me in that direction if you want to pursue this line of thought very far. I'm telling you that there is robust free speech. And if you read, going back to John Stuart Mills or the Foundations of Free Speech, it was intended to allow people to have a whole range of ideas, including some pretty bizarre ideas. It doesn't mean that they have to be condemned for it. It means they can be argued with it for it. I'm happy to go on any show and argue with the host or argue with you today when I disagree. I'm not endorsing your political, I don't even know what your ideas of political correctness are, but you're getting me to think I probably as much to disagree with you about as I do the political cesspool or anybody else.
Well, I don't think we talk very much about what my ideas are, and as you admitted, you did doing research on it before you got on here, so I think you're extrapolating a lot awfully quickly. But let's get back to your book, because I know you worked very hard on it.
The thought if you want. We can talk about this for the next hour. It's okay with me.
Okay. Well, let's talk about your book, because I know that that's what you're here to promote. How did you come to write this? Did Mary Madeline?
I want to go back to that,
people know,
Sorry, I'm not going to answer your question yet. You say that's what I'm here to promote. You say, okay, now that's another thing. You're just here to sell a book.
No, you know what? I host a book salon every week where I have authors come on and promote their books, and I think that's a good thing. I'm an author, and I promoted my book. That is not a criticism, Jerome, not at all.
I'm happy to promote my book. That's what we run for.
I'm happy to help you promote your book. That's why I'm here.
Okay, well, I'm happy to promote my book.
Okay.
Now, what's your question?
My question is, what role did Mary Madeline have in getting you your book deal, and how much did she help you in the writing of the book?
Did you get your talking points directly from Barack Obama? Look, first of all, I've never met Mary Madeline. I spoke to her once on the telephone. Mary Madeline had nothing to do with the production of the book in terms of its writing or its editorial material. After the book was published and it hit #1, Mary Madeline called me to congratulate me. It was the first time I'd ever spoken to her in my life. The book was put together with the editorial staff of this whole Simon & Schuster division that does the book. They're the ones I worked with directly. I've never talked to John McCain. I've been in the room when John McCain's given speeches. I've photographed him giving speeches. I've reported on him for WorldNet Daily. I've never met John McCain. I'm not even going to vote for John McCain. And I vote for Chuck Baldwin, as I disclosed in the book. I'm Constitution Party. They asked me to be their presidential candidate, and I declined, but I'm going to vote for Chuck Baldwin, who is the candidate of the Constitution Party. So Mary Madeline had nothing to do with the book. But, of course, I appreciate your suggesting this was just a political hit job put out by Mary Madeline, which seemed to be where you were going with that question.
No, actually, I wasn't. I think you're extrapolating a lot awfully quickly.
Well, good. Then where are you going with it? Where are you going?
As your editor, did Mary Madeline call you up when it was apparent that there were a lot of inaccuracies in the book and say, John, you have to correct this?
A lot of inaccuracies in the book. Well, I'll tell you, now I think I know where you are politically. There's a few inaccuracies in the book, very few. And if you'd read my rejoinder to the Obama camp rebuttal, which I doubt that you've done, some of the inaccuracies, let's take, for instance, the inaccuracies with regards to dedication.
Uh-huh.
Now, what I was arguing was that there was no dedication page. On the dedication page, Barack Obama put a quotation from the Bible, from Chronicles, about sojourners. We're all sojourners, as were our fathers unto us. And I said if Barack Obama buried this dedication into the introduction, it's very different than a dedication. Now, that is such a minor point. And Barack Obama did not argue with the substantive point I was making, which was that the dedication page itself is to this Chronicles issue. Now, it's all out of proportion to say, there's so many inaccuracies. Look at all these inaccuracies. That's a detail, and it's a quibble. It's a quibble that we could have, but it's insignificant in terms of the ultimate point I'm making, which Barack Obama did not object to, which is that focusing the attention on that particular passage from Chronicles is part of the key theme of the book, where Obama is saying that we're all sojourners or passersby or lost, as were our fathers unto us, which is what the quotation says, and this whole theme of Barack Obama's abandonment by his father was a major theme. So Simon & Schuster's reaction to the corrections were minor, as were my reactions to the corrections. In fact, I pressed in my rejoinder, and I said to Obama, look, why don't you save us all the problems here? Why don't you give us an exact timeline of your life so nobody's confused about dates, like your marriage or when you bought your first apartment? How about these jobs you mentioned in passing? What years did you have those? How much did you get paid? How did you get employed? And by the way, documentary evidence, why can't we see the original birth certificate? Why do we have to rely on a registration of birth in Hawaii? Why can't we see your Harvard grades? Why are you running for president with all these issues
that are not there? The whole thing about his birth certificate?
Yes, a birth certificate.
Explain that to our audience, because I think that's an interesting point.
Well, it was not a point I developed in the book, and I think in truth it's probably, to me, the significance of the point is that Obama will not release the original document. I mean, I don't know what's on the original document, and I haven't made a lot of arguments about it, except to say people don't usually hide documents that they, for some reason or other, don't want you to see. So I don't know what's on the document. The argument
you work for WorldNet Daily, right?
Yes, I do.
Well, WorldNet Daily came out and said that everything was fine with the birth certificate and that the claims you made about it were actually false.
Well, that's a disagreement between me and some of the editors of WorldNet Daily. I don't have to agree with everything they say, and I don't either. It's not my job to agree with everything anybody says. I'll tell you what I think.
Okay.
And I'm not.
So
I want to see the original birth certificate.
So they say that you're inaccurate here.
No, they did not say I'm inaccurate. But that's again, you're leaping to another conclusion. You're very good at this, Jane. They did not say that I was inaccurate. We have a disagreement about the importance there. You find me something where WorldNet Daily says that the original birth certificate has been produced. It has not, and WorldNet Daily has not said that it has. I want to see the original, and I'm sure Joseph Farrow would be happy to see it too. We may have a disagreement about the significance of it, but they have not said that I'm inaccurate. I'm sorry.
WorldNet Daily reported that, and I quote, the WorldNet Daily investigation into Obama's birth certificate utilized forgery experts, found the document to be authentic.
Well, but see, Jane, you're arguing a point I didn't make. I didn't say that the document that's on Barack Obama's website was inauthentic. I said it wasn't the original birth certificate. There's a distinction between a registry of birth, which is what that document appears to be, and a birth certificate, which is not a registry, but was generated by the hospital at the time the person has been born. And I want to see the original birth certificate.
Let me break this one to death. Let's talk about another inaccuracy. You say nowhere in the autobiography does Obama disclose...
Why don't we talk about another biased attack of yours? Go right ahead. What is it?
No, it says nowhere in the autobiography does Obama disclose that his wife to be accompanied him to Africa on the 1992 trip. Do you stand by that?
Well, now, if you look at the corrections, we said that, in fact, this is something in the epilogue. Barack Obama discusses this whole trip. He devotes pages and pages. In fact, the whole third section is about his going back to Africa. And we don't get anything about the wife being involved, either before they were married or after, until, a few sentences at the end of the epilogue. And again, my point was to say that, that's the point I'm trying to draw, is that he may have mentioned it once in passing out of context. Is a small little quibble to me. It's not an inaccuracy. What's accurate is the point I was making. That in this long discussion I'm going to answer your questions.
Obama devotes the entire section of his autobiography to...
I'll tell you what, Jane, why don't you tell me when you want to hear my answers, or don't ask me questions. I mean, just go ahead and say what you want to say. I'll sit here and listen.
No, I'm
Otherwise,
just
I'll give you your answer. I'd appreciate it if you get the whole answer.
You had to make a lot of corrections to this book, yes?
No, there's a few corrections, and they're minor. They were insignificant. The book is, in fact, another document you apparently didn't read, Jane, is I published a document of all the things in the book that Barack Obama now concedes, because he did not even touch upon them. And the vast majority of the substance of the book, in fact, new revelations that it was Frank Marshall Davis, the communist poet who was Barack Obama's mentor in Hawaii. That had not been previously disclosed by Obama. We now have that confirmed. I'd say the weight of evidence is on the side of my book, The Abomination, demonstrating that substantively the vast majority of arguments, weren't even touched upon by Obama, and the quibbles were minor little picky points that were blown out of proportion and could be easily changed with a few words revision and reprinting.
Well, you say, still Obama has yet to answer questions about whether he ever dealt drugs, or if he stopped using marijuana and cocaine completely in college, or whether his drug use extended into his law school days or beyond. But, in fact, Obama did address that, and he said he did stop using drugs in college.
Well, Jane, again, you're not looking at the context of what I wrote. What I'm saying is that people who report that they use drugs are notoriously inaccurate and misleading and lie when they comment upon that they quit. Or when
now, see, this is interesting to me, because you're extrapolating a lot about his behavior based on I'm not sure what. Do you have personal experience with drugs or alcohol that leads you to believe this?
Why don't you first let me answer the question and then ask another one? Or better yet, why don't you ask 6 questions in a row and I won't answer any of them? In fact, better yet, why don't I just sit here and you can tell everybody how bad I am?
I'm just curious where you get this information about alcoholics and drug addicts.
Do you want me to answer your questions or you just want to make your points? I mean, I'm happy to do either one. You tell me what.
Okay.
It's your interview.
I'll ask the question then, okay?
Then you're going to listen to the answer?
Yes, I will.
Well, that's okay. That's refreshing. Now, what's the question?
Where do you get this information about alcoholics and drug addicts that lead you to these conclusions about Barack Obama?
I've done extensive work on alcoholics and drug addicts and all kinds of criminals and bad guys. When I was working in universities for a period of almost 10 years, I've been recruited by the federal government and worked on various programs on anti-hostage, anti-terrorist. I was trained by some of the best psychiatrists in the world. I've watched hundreds of hours of criminals in prison, from drug addicts to rapists to bank robbers to terrorists, you name it. And one of the conclusions I drew from that research was that people who use drugs are notoriously liars when it comes to when their reports of when they quit and when they didn't quit. So I began there. And that was the starting point of my question.
Do you use drugs or alcohol yourself?
Me? I'm not under investigation. I'm not the subject of this book.
My question is, you seem to be extrapolating an awful lot about Barack Obama's drug and alcohol use based on projections, based on no facts whatsoever.
I see it, based on projections of my facts.
So am I saying that I think that you're projecting here? I think I'm doing the same thing to you that you've done to Barack Obama.
Oh, I'm trying to make what you just said into a question, even though it's a little difficult. I think you're asking me what's the basis of why I would raise this question. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, I am.
Okay. While I have not been publishing them, and while I have not been able to validate them, I've gotten tons of both emails and other suggestions I don't consider yet printable. I have not talked about it. But they have opened the question to me enough in my mind that, given my past experience looking into this type of issue, and given how exactly Obama writes about it, how vaguely he himself seems to draw these lines and define it, that I think it's an issue that, to me, as an investigative reporter, it has drawn my curiosity. And if I had the resources and the time, I can assure you it's one of the issues I would bore into for further investigation. In my own mind, I'm not resolved on the question, and that's what I'm telling you. But I'm not making any accusations or claims because I don't have the facts to do it. But I think it's legitimate that I tell you, based on my experience, based on how this is looked at, it's an open question yet in my mind, and it remains such.
Well, I have to say that when I go through and I read your book and I see, the way that you sort of build these stories up, that what you tend to do is take something ordinary and try and make it into something sinister. You're always looking for some sort of hidden agenda or secret agenda. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence there that you're taking a simple statement that he made and then starting to say that he's using drugs now or that he sold drugs. I mean, that's an awful long projection, John. And I'm just wondering where that comes from.
First of all, my name is Jerry, it's not John. I don't expect you to remember that.
I'm confusing what's with what.
You don't have to be accurate. I'm sorry, there's a major inaccuracy. You're now building insinuations. Look, the issue is this. And by the way, it's hard to build another question out of what you just said. You just went through a long accusation. I mean, once we'll be on trial. Is there a question in that? Now, if your question is, am I trying to distort or otherwise misrepresent or I would be accused of smear Obama? No. I think it's legitimate. Let me take an example. I make an argument that Obama and Ayers had more than a casual association. That Axelrod is lying when he said the reason they knew each other was because they live in the same neighborhood and their kids go to school together. It's an apparent lie, it's an obvious lie, because Obama's kids are two little girls and Ayers' kids are, adults. And whether it's like Dennis Miller said when I was in a Dennis Miller interview, unless Ayers' kids were very slow, they never went to school a day. Now, the evidence that we're now getting, and what I was arguing in the book was that this was an intentional choice by Obama to seek out Ayers because of who he was as a radical. This was politically supporting Obama's desire to get elected in that South Chicago district for the state legislature. Alice Palmer had used the association with Ayers and Bernardine Dorn to her advantage that was being passed on to Obama. And Obama had a long association, which now, as we can see the Annenberg Challenge documents, we see they were working together to advance this radical agenda in the schools. I'm quite confident that if we could get a hold of the Woods Fund documents, we'd see an equally long and collaborative period. So what I'm saying is, I'm looking at evidence like an investigative reporter would be, and I'm basing the deductions on the evidence that's available. And the evidence that's available is these were not minor associations. In fact, the arguments I'm making in the book substantively with subsequent research are turning out to be more true and more validated than they were when I wrote them.
Well, I have to say that you had to make a lengthy list of corrections to your book based on research on media matters.
Let me go back.
And you said you wanted to let me talk, so let me talk. Let me talk.
I want to answer that point.
The kinds of errors that people with a PhD from Harvard don't usually accidentally make.
Jay, I'll tell you, you're something. You went back to lengthy errors. I've said this is not lengthy errors, it's minor errors. Now, if you want to just repeat yourself again, repetition doesn't make it more true. I disagree with that point. There are minor errors, there are not lengthy errors in the book.
Well, there's still kinds of errors that people with a PhD from Harvard don't usually make accidentally.
Okay. Now, let's talk about that. Let's take that little bite. Now it's a personal attack. You're saying to me, Harvard PhDs making these mistakes. Where are we going with that? It's a personal attack. Everybody makes mistakes. Every book I've written has some mistakes in it. Everything I write has some corrections or needs to it. I'd like to see something any major writer has written that never has any mistakes in it. And besides, even when there's not mistakes, there are disagreements of opinion, there are disagreements of argument, there are different things which might mean in a reprinting. We choose to rephrase something a certain way so that it appears to be more consistent with what we were originally trying to say. But that doesn't mean that the book is now so inaccurate it has to be thrown out. That's just an attack on the book, and I reject that it has any substance to it. The corrections are minor.
You were one of the original Swift voters, and Swift voting now means a false or malicious campaign.
It does to you. It doesn't to me. I don't think that's what it means. No,
if somebody's being Swift voted now, both parties, all parties use this to mean a false or malicious campaign.
No, Jane, that's the left spin on it. If you want to give me 50 million people that believe that's what it said, I still say that's not what it means. It means that to people who want to say that our attacks against John Kerry, you also want to say we're malicious, not fact-based, inaccurate, the same litany of things you're charging me with in this interview, which is amusing to me. You go back to the same old stuff.
You claim that it's valid because you have about 700 footnotes.
But Swift voting means to me.
In the book, that's frequently something that you cite as something that
Swift voting, I'm still back on your
right?
previous. I'm still back in your previous point, Jane. But you don't get the answer you want. You just skip to something else and attack me again. I'm going to answer the other one. Okay. Swift voting, to me, means that we brought out factual-based arguments that expose aspects of the character or policy or other issues with regards to the candidacy of John Kerry or now Barack Obama. And it's a legitimate exercise that is fully justified and documented by a long tradition of First Amendment critical speech during election campaigns. And so Swift voting, to me, in that context, is an honorable activity, and I completely disregard and contradict and disagree with your assessment of Swift voting as you characterized it. So now what's your next question?
Well, my next question is, there are credibility problems here. I mean,
with you,
why should I believe what it is that you say in this book? I mean, I think that you have substantial factual errors.
I don't care if you believe what I say in the book. That's
Well,
why
but you should believe it. But I think you care whether other people believe whether your book
No,
is something
what
that
I
they should buy
care
and
is-
rely on. For
No, what
instance, in your book you have 700 footnotes.
Oh,
And
700,
in the preface, you have 11. In the first 9, you reference yourself.
So what's wrong with that? The first 9 I'm talking about, the first 9 are the preface. I'm telling you what
But
I
you
wrote.
also write footnote. You also footnote
Jane,
and
I'm not
culture.
finished
You
answering.
footnote opinion
Jane,
pieces.
Jane,
Huh?
hey, Jane, time out, Jane. I'm not finished answering your point yet. Time out.
Okay.
The first 9 here, it's a preface. I'm talking about myself. And I'm saying, here's the things I've written, and I'm letting people know where they are so they can go find them. That's completely legitimate. That's not equivalent to utilizing myself as a source for the arguments I'm making about Obama. I'm talking about myself. Now, you then slipped into the footnotes I have about other people like Ann Coulter. Yes, I quote a wide range of people with opinions, but they're not the majority of the footnotes. Take a look at the footnotes. The footnotes have got their original. I went to Indonesia. I translated the newspapers. I went to the Indonesian television. I did the same thing with Kenya. The newspapers in Kenya were in English. But I went to the original sources. There must be 100 or 150 primary books that I went to, including, Reverend Wright says, have you read James Cone? He's the chief theologist of Black Liberation Theology. Well, I owned a number of Cone's books. I bought as many of the others as I could get. I also bought Dwight Hopkins' books. I have a library probably of 500 or 600 books on African-American relations and racial relations in the United States, which I use many of the primary sources there, too, including Gunnar Myrdal, American Dilemma, Kenneth Clark. There's a wide range of footnotes in this book, and it's unfair to characterize them on the basis of a few that refer to admittedly conservative pundits or commentators.
You footnoted Andy Martin, a right-wing blogger who called a judge a dirty Jew.
Well, again, we're back to I don't endorse everything that Andy Martin says by footnoting him. I footnoted Andy Martin on one particular point that Andy made. Andy said a sentence, which I thought was an interesting sentence, and that was if Barack Obama would lie about his family, what wouldn't he lie about? And I quoted that one point. Doesn't endorse everything that Andy Martin writes. I quoted Malcolm X. Well, I don't endorse Malcolm X either. But I was referring to what Malcolm X said, and I was analyzing it. So, I mean, you're trying to imply that I endorse the complete thoughts of everybody that I footnoted or referred to in the book. That's just not the case. Any more than I endorse the views of every host on whose show I choose to go.
Well, your basic tone I'm getting from you is that you think that most of these critiques are far-left critiques, right?
Brilliant. Did the light bulb just go off? Yes.
But you also have called George Bush to the far left. And the Republican Party to the far left.
I don't recall calling George Bush to the far left. I think I said
you said there's no difference between the Democrats and the Republicans, that they're all...
Well, that doesn't mean that... What I've argued specifically about George Bush is that I think that he has drifted from a lot of the important conservative principles, which I continue to argue for. And I've disagreed with George Bush, especially in the second term, on many different issues. As I said, I've written also that I am not a Republican. I've never been registered as a Republican, nor a Democrat.
No, I know. You accused John McCain of getting support from a lobbyist group that that's backed by a Muslim terrorist group and has ties to drug criminal networks and Al-Qaeda.
Well, it's not only I accused him of it, I showed some of the ties. I showed some of the funding networks. I went into this whole Albanian support group that McCain has worked with. I also wrote and talked about McCain's ties to George Soros. I wrote about, long before it was brought out as an issue, various ties that Rick Davis and others on McCain's staff have had to lobbyists. I've been very critical of John McCain. I've written critically about McCain for 4 years now, going back to his comprehensive immigration reform bill, and I've criticized that very actively.
You say that his father-in-law's money comes from I believe, mob ties, liquor industry racket?
Well, it's true. I mean, his wife's father was part of the Kemper Marley mob in Arizona. He was part of the original bootlegging mob that went back to working with Jack Kennedy's father. I mean,
Does it bother you? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Does it bother me? I mean, do I have an emotional response to it? No, these are just reporting. I want people to know the facts, and I'm reporting the facts. See, you're somehow implying that I guess all reporting to you is emotionally driven or ideologically driven. I mean, that's the conclusion I'm coming to. I report things just to get the facts out. I want people to know what the record is. I look into things in a variety of issues, without necessarily a political motivation, simply because I'm trying to understand who John McCain was. And if you want to get a political motivation for it, I've been opposing McCain. If McCain's president on issues of immigration, I suspect I'll continue to oppose McCain.
Well, but you also expressed the conviction that Catholics and Muslims are boy buggerers.
Oh, now we're going there.
Is that reporting as well, huh?
Jane, now I'm beginning to, up till now you've been working within some things that have had some fairly fuzzy but reasonable bounds. Now, if we're going to talk about the comments I made in Free Republic, you're going to have to also acknowledge, instead of presenting that comment as if it had no history, or I had not already answered it, which I take, again, to be a cheap shot, let's present first that those were a series of comments I wrote in Free Republic in a period of time, which was a very defined period of time before I wrote Unfit for Command. And I said I first of all apologized for those comments. I said they were written to be, some of them sarcastic, some of them to be ironic, some of them simply to be outrageous, but they did not reflect then and do not reflect now my true beliefs. I made that point abundantly clear. I've said I wouldn't write comments that were outrageous like that again, and I haven't. Now, you have to understand, if you want to discuss those comments, that that's what I've said about them, and I don't defend them. And your attempt to bring them up without measuring that context and making people aware of that context is, on your part, taking what I would now characterize as a cheap shot because you didn't properly present the entire context of the comments.
Well, you're asking to be taken seriously as a journalist, Jerome, and so those things actually do have weight on that.
Well,
I don't think you can just erase them from the history and
care.
expect that people
Jane,
aren't going to take them into consideration when
Jane,
evaluating your journalistic integrity.
Jane, I don't care how you take them. I'm not interested in what you take about my journalistic integrity. I couldn't care less what you think.
Okay.
To be honest with you. But no, I'm not finished yet. I'm going to make my point here now, too. My point is this. I wrote outrageous comments, and I said I wrote outrageous comments. Now, if you want to say I believe in them, I don't. Then when I wrote them, I wrote them to be outrageous. Okay, so the Catholic Church, I said the Pope was senile in those comments. Catholic Church understands why I wrote them. I'm accepted as a good member of the Catholic Church, good standing right now. In fact, I've been attacked by people like you who say, we've got to condemn Corsi. And look at all these awful things he obviously believes. And the Catholic Church, being more fair than you're being right now and more honest about it, said, well, wait a minute. Of course he doesn't believe those things. He wrote them. He's apologized for them. He explained them. So that's the status of those comments. Did the Pope say that? Pardon me? Catholic Church said that in writing, yes.
The Pope said that to you? I'm impressed.
No, I did not say the Pope. Now, where did you get the Pope into this? You've got quite imagination here, Jane. I admire your imagination. I said the Catholic Church.
Okay.
Catholic Church. Then I did not say the Pope. But I do admire your creative imagination. It was quite good.
Okay, I appreciate that. So, but I think that you've got a book on a New York Times bestseller list, and you're asking to be taken seriously as a journalist.
When did I ask you to
take
take it seriously? Wait a minute. I didn't ask you to take me anyway. I don't care.
No, you have presented this as a work of serious scholarship.
Pardon me?
And not a political hit job. You're telling me that the Republican Party...
Jane, I don't care how you characterize it. You can characterize my work any way you want. I don't care.
You're telling me that a Republican operative, Mary Madeline, did not hire you to write a hit job on Barack Obama.
I didn't say that.
This is a work of serious scholarship.
I don't know what Mary Madeline did. If you want to know what Mary Madeline did, you go ask Mary Madeline. I didn't tell you that. I told you I only talked to Mary Madeline once in my life. And that was when she congratulated me to write the book. The book came on number one. Mary Madeline
is Dick Cheney's right-hand person. You were paid by them to write a book that you had to make many corrections to. And it's a hit job on Barack Obama. So I'm just trying to establish where you're coming from. You have said in the past...
I really want a copy of this interview. You've done the best job so far I can see.
Thank you.
To be just so far out there ideologically that you're almost incoherent to me.
Well, I'm going to ask you, does it bother you when right-wing operatives like Hugh Hewitt call you fringe?
I don't care what Hugh Hewitt says one way or the other. But, Jane, I'm not in this for a popularity contest. Are you? You evidently care. You wouldn't ask me these questions unless you care. Jane, didn't your mother tell you that, sticks and stones will break your bones, but names will never hurt you? How were you raised? If you start caring about what people think about you, Jane, good luck. I don't. I'm not in this for popularity.
And I admire you for that. I do. So
you
tell
admire
me,
me
what
for
is
something.
it that...
Wait a minute, you actually said you admire me for something.
I do. For not caring for big words.
I'm really impressed. That's the first indication I've had that you had any ability for objectivity.
Well, you took the money and you wrote the book and you're willing to just get out there and promote it and take the sticks and stones that go along with it. I think that's admirable. So, but I would like to ask you, what do you think happened on 9/11?
Some terrorists hijacked airplanes and they flew them into the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. I made it abundantly clear that I am not a 9/11 truther. I said, in fact, what's abundantly clear to me now is you have not read any of the rejoinders I've written. You've only written...
I've read quite a bit of what you've written. I think that's pretty apparent here. I think you didn't put your homework on me, but I actually took the time to do my homework on you.
The last two pieces I wrote, in fact, there's something on WorldNet Daily right now if you go look at it. On the piece it's referred to in the piece, take a look at the one I just put on the New York Times, calling me a racist, my rejoinder to that. I referenced two pieces. One, the rejoinder I wrote to Obama's 40-page rebuttal, and secondly, the things that are not in the book, the things that are in the book that Obama never even talked about, that now I guess he concedes their credibility. I made it abundantly clear. I'm not a 9/11 truther.
But what did happen at Building 3? Because it's my understanding that you say that what happened with the planes could not have brought it down.
No, I did not say that anywhere.
Really?
These comments all come off of an Alex Jones show in which I said I was looking at some evidence that had been presented on that. I considered it interesting at the time, so I was preparing to publish it. Now, if anybody researched it, as I concluded that research, I concluded that it had no merit. I concluded that it wasn't credible. I didn't publish it. I've never said a word in print. I was ultimately unconvinced by the evidence. Now, I look at a wide range of scientific evidence of all kinds of different bases, and some of it fascinates me, and some of it I published, some of it I almost published, and some of it I don't even consider publishing. This was in the range of I was looking at it, but I rejected it. And so everything that I have in print, where I am right now, is that there is no credible evidence of any kind that I can see that disputes the 9/11 Commission's stated conclusion that the hijackers, the Islamic terrorist hijackers, were the ones solely responsible for taking the airplanes on 9/11 and crashing them into the World Trade Center and Pentagon. And I said that repeatedly, and the assumption that I was anything other than that is just not true. It's not based in fact.
Well, I think that Alex Jones is going to be very disappointed.
No, in fact, Alex Jones and I have had a conversation about this. And in fact, we did a webcast very much like this in which we talked about it. And Alex Jones and I made it clear that while Alex is there, he and I continue to disagree about this issue.
Well, why is it that drew you to the Constitution Party? Why is it that you feel that they are the best option for leading the country?
Well, I think I began working with the Constitution Party when I started working with Howard Phillips on the whole issue of the late great USA. That was, to me, really the beginning of a look at this whole movement toward a European Union-style integration in the North America, which I argued, if we didn't stop it, could lead to a North American Union the same way over 50 years. Europe evolved from trade agreements into a regional government. And the Constitution Party, this is one of their main themes, one of their major issues. As I began to work with Howard Phillips, he asked me if I would run for president as the Constitution Party's candidate. I considered it for a while and I joined the party. I ultimately declined to be the candidate for president, and I continue to belong to the party, and I'll support Chuck Baldwin. So that's the history of how that happened.
Do you agree with the platform that abortion doctors should be killed?
No, I don't agree with all the issues on the platform, and I consider those to be off topic. The only one I really want to talk about today is the North American Union issue, in which I agree with Chuck Baldwin. And if you want to wrap it up now, I had scheduled a few minutes for this, and it's gone on much larger. I've got some writing commitments.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me, Jerome. I really do.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it as well.
Good. I'm glad. No, but if there was something else you wanted to say, go ahead.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.